all very scared now. Thank you for having me. Oh, am I on? Oh, it fell off. It's the magic part of the show. Better? Hi, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here. Where are the five fingers? Oh, there they are. You know, when Brian mentioned that, that reminded me that there's a person back home, a terrible person, that that Brian and I both know, who may watch this video later, who follows all of Brian's statuses and tweets, sort of like an obsessive person. And that person wears Vibram 5 fingers every single day. And Brian one day made some kind of joke, as Brian constantly does, about Vibrams, and I don't know what exactly he said, but this awful person just commented, "Great shoes." And so then for the next week or two, every time Brian made some elaborate joke that clearly took 5 minutes to think up, I just comment "Great cereal." great whatever. But I'm very happy to be here. This is my second time in the UK. I've learned on this trip that you guys don't know what a lot of words mean. So, does anyone know what a biscuit is? Okay, biscuits are fluffy, and you usually get them at Kentucky Fried Chicken. That's helpful. Now, I know what you guys, when you hear it's not rocket science, you think that means it's not arugula science? That's not what that means. Rockets, you'll find out later. It's probably a scientist on the program somewhere. My first time in the UK, I went to London, which is your other city. When I went there, I was 23, and I was right out of college, and I went there by myself for a day because I had really well planned this trip. And so I ran around London by myself, and there was this Indian restaurant with really, really good food. And the waiter, for some reason, took intense pity on me. And he kept coming up and being like, "You're all alone." And I was like, "Yeah." And then, where's your boyfriend? Do you have a boyfriend? Yeah, but he's not here. Oh. And so he kept bringing me all this free food. Is this a thing you guys do? He brought me constant free food to the point.
Fancied you.
What's that? He fancied me. Very well. Yeah, so he brought me all this free food until I literally threw up in the bathroom. I was eating so much. So that was my first trip, and also while I was there, I went to Piccadilly Circus, which is just a mall, basically. And while I was there, I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna get the British flag and put it on my suitcase." So I got this sticker of the Union Jack, and I put it on my suitcase. And then as I was going through U.S. Customs, I got insanely hassled. And they were throwing everything out of my bag, and I hadn't even claimed anything, I hadn't bought anything, and they were throwing everything out and kind of yelling at me, and I was like, "What the hell? I don't think I seem that threatening, but okay." And then as my luggage continued through the scan, everyone kept looking at it, and I was like, "Boy, is the Union Jack this disliked? This is weird." And then I started carrying around the States when I was back home, and then one day I looked at it and I was like, "That's not the Union Jack. That's the Confederate flag." So, international symbol for I am a racist. So anyway, I'm Carrie Poppy, and I'm a stupid American. So I know this because when I was 14, I bought a shirt with a drawing of 3 buses on it. This is the only picture of it I could find online, so that's not me when I was 13. So it had these 3 buses on it, and it had this Japanese writing below them. And I bought it at Urban Outfitters. You guys have Urban Outfitters? No? Well. And I remember I was smart enough to say to the cashier, like she'd know, "Do you know what this writing means?" And she said, "I don't know, like, here are 3 buses." And I thought, yeah, okay, it's probably here are 3 buses. Great shirt. So I bought it because I liked the design. I brought it home, and I was wearing it to school one day, and my friend Emmy Yamaguchi, she looked at it and she started laughing, and it was in the middle of Spanish class, so I couldn't ask her what was up. And at the end of class, she said, "Do you know what your shirt says?" And I said, "Here are 3 buses." And she said, "No, it says I am a stupid American." That's impossible. I mean, Yamaguchi is playing a trick on me. So I kept wearing it. And then one day, I was at my friend Gint's house, and his brother was dating a woman or a girl who spoke Japanese. And she looked at my shirt, and she started laughing. And she said, "Do you know what your shirt says?" And I said, "I am a stupid American." And she said, "You know?" So I kept wearing this shirt, like half out of amusement and half out of this sort of like penance for having bought it, like self-shame. So I think, as a stupid American, I'm uniquely qualified to tell you how to talk to someone who you might think doesn't quite have their wits about them. But, they're not stupid. They're just people who don't know what you know yet. You'll also find from this talk that I am not good at slides. Before I get started, I'm going to give you some additional framework to who I am, besides my American stupidity. So I host a podcast called No Ross and Carrie. Hey, that's us. Oh, thank you. Thank you, 2 of you. That's me and my co-host, Ross Blotcher. So what we do is we investigate all sorts of extraordinary claims. We're a young podcast. We were born in March 2011. And we've done about 1 investigation every month. And sometimes our investigations take many, many months. Like we spent 6 months undercover in the Mormon church, becoming Mormons. And so there were many investigations going on at the same time at that point, but we still release a new investigation every month. And sometimes we have supplementary interview episodes as well. Our slogan is, "We show up so you don't have to." So, in other words, when you need an anecdote to help share the truth about the scientific analysis of an extraordinary claim, we've got an earful for you. So, in the 2 years since our podcast was born, we've been Reiki'd. This is the bed on which a woman came and waved feathers over my head and shook some rattles and blessed me. All to heal my migraines, and I have headache medicine with me, so it tells you how well that worked. I was exorcised of a demon by Bob Larson. Do you guys know who Bob Larson is? That's his name? Okay. So he's a little more famous in the States. He's our biggest exorcist. And he's actually Protestant, which is sort of makes him unique because he wears the priestly garment, but is Protestant. And he's hilarious. He's very self-serving. He has tons and tons of books that are all vanity published. And one of my favorite things about them is that on the back, where you'd normally see quotes from critics, there will be quotes like, "Demons are haunting America, and there's only one person to save them," and then it's attributed to Bob Larson. So he determined that I had a demon while I went to his seminar, and these young women that he works with only women who are under 20. They exorcised me of my demon, and they said that I was the hardest exorcism case they had ever had. We've had our palms analyzed by palmists. I went to visit Sedona, Arizona, and look at their energy vortexes. They won't say vortices. Where they believe that all this energy is swirling around in a special way in Arizona, and it affects you somehow. That same episode, Ross went and visited the Bigfoot Museum and hung out with some Bigfoot experts. We tried to enlarge our breast and penis, respectively, which didn't work, sorry. We had fire cupping, really not pleasant. I had those sores on my back for quite some time. We were analyzed by astrologers. We did the master cleanse. Do you guys know the master cleanse? Oh, we have all the bullshit, sorry. So the master cleanse is where you drink only lemon juice, water, maple syrup, and cayenne pepper for 5 to 10 days, and you don't eat anything except for laxatives. So I did that, and Ross got colonic irrigation, where they stick a tube up your butt and wipe it out, which we decided not to use on the image for the show. And I will say, I thought I was getting, the better end of the deal, but no, much worse, I would say, is the master cleanse. It's just incredible stomach pain for 10 days. We had my dogs psychoanalyzed by a pet psychic. We visited a creation museum, and the best way to do it is take a paleontologist with you. They're very angry with us. We hung out with the Pan-Africans. We had ourselves Tarot read. We overdosed on homeopathy, James Randi style, and we chased it with wine. We did hypnotherapy for a few weeks. We were acupunctured, which is surprisingly painful. Ross got ear candled. I was too nervous for that one. I went undercover in a pro-life, anti-abortion crisis pregnancy center as a pregnant woman. They immediately wanted me to take a pregnancy test. I guess this must happen. They're kind of afraid of non-pregnant people showing up. So I just immediately started crying to try to cover. Pretty fun. And as I said, we went undercover in the Mormon church for 6 months and actually became Mormons, got baptized. And I didn't mention we also joined the Raelians, a UFO cult, which you probably heard about, right? With each of these investigations, we do some basic layman's research. We use reputable scientific sources wherever possible into the claim being made. But I think anyone who listens to the show would agree that the power is in the anecdotes. And it's those unusual stories about what makes each belief system and community around it unique. And that's what's memorable for most people and starts that conversation about belief systems that might have been dismissed without a second thought for the skeptic or accepted blindly for the more credulous believer. So while studies and data are obviously critical to understanding the world around us, I think that stories, anecdotes, dare I say, are the guts and glue of effectively sharing that understanding. So just a year or two before I started doing my show, I was anything but a skeptic. I dabbled in every sort of woo you might imagine. So I'm going to tell you this one really visceral memory I have that I think especially shows how powerful a personal story can be, and it's the story of me being haunted. So in 2008, I moved to a small guest house in the San Fernando Valley above LA. I couldn't find a single picture of it online except the kitchen. There it is. So the owner rented out this guest house and the larger house in front of it, but she didn't live there. And she hadn't been into either home in months, I think maybe over a year. So when I moved there, it was cute, it was charming, but it was full of dead bugs and cobwebs, and I had to really clean it out. And I had moved there as this 4-year relationship that I was having was dying, and I knew that. And I was 24 going on 25, and I'd moved to Los Angeles to go to an improv comedy school. And so you could call me an emotional mess at this point. I was 24, so I had an excuse for that. Now I'm 29, and I can't get away with calling my mom and telling her I had a nightmare about Billy Joel. That's neither here nor there. So back when I was 24, I moved into this guest house with my 2 dogs, my dream of being a comedy writer, and about $6,000 in savings. And this was at the height of the US recession. So I got a writing job, and it only paid me for about 10 hours a week, and I got another part-time job transcribing reality TV. So if I hadn't already been an emotional mess, watching an entire season of the raw footage of The Bachelor will do that to you for sure. So each job just paid like pennies, and I was this unknown kid, like straight out of college, and no one really wanted to hire me. So I was like in this like constant state of anxiety, trying to figure out what I was going to do next with my life. And around a year into this, this one day I was driving along Ventura Boulevard in the Valley, and I saw this occult bookstore, the Psychic Eye. There it is. And I still had a lot of spiritual beliefs at this point. I had floundered around in Christianity for some time trying to find the right denomination for me, but I was very deeply devoted to Jesus at that time. I dabbled in a lot of new agey stuff, feng shui, aura reading, astrology, things like that. And so on this day of feeling like utter shit about my life, and how it wasn't turning out at all like I wanted, and I was 24 and I might as well throw in the towel, I stopped into the Psychic Eye to see if they had some sort of spiritual solution to my constant anxiety. So I walked around the Psychic Eye, and I was looking for like a Jesus candle or some Buddha incense or something to cure my woes, and the thing that called to me were these Chinese stress balls with those tiny little bells inside of them, and supposedly if you roll them around it will sort of relieve your stress. So I got those. They were like $8. I took them home, rolled them around in my hand, nothing. Still feeling anxious, so I just set them aside. I ignored them for a while, and then I started getting this like icky, heavy feeling on my chest, like something was in the room with me. And so my house just suddenly felt filled with this like ominous presence, this like foreboding sense that something weird, something bad was going to happen. And I thought it was a demon. And this wasn't the first time that I had encountered Satan in my life. When I was about 13, I tried to exorcise a demon out of my friend Ryan. And to this day, he says he didn't fake it, that he's like, I would tell you now. He still says just, something psychological must have happened. Maybe he was just imaginative. We both ended up being theater majors, take from that what you will. But now at 24 in this suddenly haunted house, I was terrified. And I felt like there was this evil presence filling my little studio guest house. And so the room was divided into a living area and a sleeping area. And for some reason I felt like the living area was like especially concentrated with this evil energy. I felt like that's where the demon likes to hang out, I guess. So it was like the worst place to go in. And so every time I went in, I was filled with this like dread and fear, and I would have just not gone home, but I had these 2 dogs, and I had to go home and take care of them. So I would rush home, I would take the dogs out on like ridiculously long walks, and then go home, run through the living area, and sit in my bed and cry. After a while, I started thinking like, well, when did I start feeling this way? And then I remembered the Psychic Eye. Oh, I started feeling this way that day when I went there and I bought those stress balls. And I thought, okay, maybe the stress balls are like carrying this evil energy with them. And if I get rid of those, the feeling will go away. So I went and I threw them out. The feeling was still there. And then I was like, okay, maybe it's the dress I wore in there. Maybe it's holding this energy. And it was this horrible vintage dress that I wish I still had. But I threw that away. And my boyfriend at the time, he lived several hundred miles away in Sacramento, and I would call him every night, and I would cry, and I'd be like, you don't understand how it is, it's so bad in here. And he said, this is getting out of hand, you need to go see somebody, something's wrong. But I just took that as him not understanding my plight. He thinks I'm crazy, great. So how could I explain to him this tangible fear I had in that room? And he was so far away, he couldn't come to visit, so he couldn't feel it himself. And I didn't blame him for not understanding, but I just knew he was wrong. So I called my best friend. She grew up Wiccan, so she completely related. She wasn't threatened by what I said, and she didn't think I was an idiot. And so she said, okay, great. Just burn some sage, and just say out loud, "You're not welcome here. You need to go home." And so, okay, well, that makes sense. So I went and I bought some sage, and I waved it around my room, and I was like, "You're not welcome here. You need to leave. Go back to the psychic eye." But I still felt it. There was no response. I called a feng shui practitioner and asked her for help, and she advised that I have a $300 consultation, which I couldn't afford. I looked for exorcists and spiritual cleansers, which surprisingly I couldn't find in LA, to LA's credit. So finally, knowing everyone would think I was crazy, but completely out of options, I posted on Facebook about it, and I said, "This is so embarrassing, and I know you're all gonna think I'm nuts, but I think my house is haunted, and I'm getting this like terrible sense of foreboding all the time. I have this pressure on my chest, and constant tingles in my arms, and like I don't even want to go in my house." And someone said, "Do you know about carbon monoxide poisoning?" And what? So I looked that up, and sure enough, a lot of cases of alleged hauntings were caused by carbon monoxide poisoning. And so I thought, And then I remembered that when I moved in, and there were all those cobwebs and all those dead bugs, there was also the smell of gas. And my neighbor had come, and he had tightened the pipes, and the smell went away, so I hadn't thought anything of it. But I thought, well, okay, I'll call the gas company, I'll see what they say. And they came over, and they tested it, and they said, "You're lucky you're alive." So instead of this story, I could have told you all about the symptoms of haunting. We could have sat here and just talked about case studies and what makes a haunting happen, and what the symptoms of carbon monoxide poisoning are. And as scientifically minded people, you personally might have absorbed that just as well as my story. But that's not the case for most people. And I guarantee you that every time you hear about carbon monoxide poisoning, maybe for the rest of your life, you'll remember this story. And that's because stories, personal stories, are some of the most powerful rhetorical devices in sharing your point of view. We tend to shy away from anecdotes as science-minded people because we know one story doesn't make an argument. That's certainly true. My story would be useless if I were the only person in the world who had this experience and reacted to carbon monoxide this way. So it's that sustained, collaborated knowledge that makes a claim powerful. And if I couldn't back up my claim that my haunting was a CO leak and that many other hauntings might be the exact same thing, then you'd be right to doubt my explanation for it. But when science does back you up, personal stories are the color that turns that paint by number into a painting. So, for example, when you hear about the Mormon Church's treatment of women, it can seem like just this vague detail in a laundry list of uglies about a church that's just sort of easy to pick on. But when Ross and I went undercover for 6 months becoming Mormons, I saw firsthand how that church's unyielding position on the role of women in the home caused incalculable suffering. Every Sunday for 6 months, Ross and I would go to church, and the first hour was what you might think of as church. It was an hour of lessons and singing and sharing. And then there were 2 additional hours every Sunday. The second hour was gospel principles class, and then the third hour you break into men and women. I don't know what the people who are intersex do if they go to Mormon church. So we'd break into the different genders. The men went to the priesthood meeting, and the women went to Relief Society. And at every Relief Society meeting, women would share their struggles and their concerns, and 100% of the time, it was about family. If the woman was newly married, she would cry and talk about whether she could please her husband. If she had kids, she would cry about her kids and whether they would be okay. But the most heartbreaking was the women who were not yet married. And they would cry and say, maybe I'll never fulfill my role as a woman. Maybe I'll never be a mother. And that was, to them, like losing your entire sense of identity. And some of these women were barely 20, and they thought their lives were over because they weren't married. So one day I casually said, you know, I kind of want to get married, but I don't want to have kids. Is that okay? And they looked at me and looked at each other, and I was new, so they didn't want to scare me off. So very quickly, they sort of silently thought about what to do. And then one woman said, oh, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, you know, there was another woman who used to come here. What was her name? Anyway, she didn't want kids. And that was supposed to make me feel better. Great. Or how about the Raelian UFO cult? Many of us have heard about their crazy alleged sex orgies, the claims that aliens created us. But by spending time directly with the the Raelians, 5 months in our case undercover, you can see everything firsthand instead of going on hearsay. So here I am getting my DNA uploaded to our alien overlords. So they believe that reincarnation is actually just being cloned. That's how we all get our new lives in the hereafter. And the only way this happens is if you send your DNA to the aliens as they're passing over Earth at a certain point in time. There are 3 times a year when they're especially close to Earth. And so you can go up on this mountaintop and get baptized and send your DNA up. So Ross and I did that. So there will be new Rosses and Carries in the hereafter. You know, all these things, I could tell you that the master cleanse has no science behind it, that energetic toxins aren't a real thing and our bodies can flush them out just fine. Or I could tell you about my 5 harrowing days on the master cleanse instead. I could tell you this personal story about what happened to me. The stomach pain was so bad, a doctor told me to go to the emergency room if it got any worse. I had to stop the experiment before it finished. And I think those stories are much more powerful, even though we know the data and the science back us up. So I know you can't spend all your time visiting acupuncturists and joining religions, and if you're normal, unlike me and Ross, you don't want to. But if everyone in this room just committed to maybe just 2 things that you care about the most, maybe 2 extraordinary claims that most interest you, or maybe the 2 that you think are the most harmful, or maybe 2 that are most important to people you love, and that it's important for you to understand them firsthand and not dismiss them. If you looked into those from a personal point of view and had as much of a personal experience with them as you could, we would have this arsenal of firsthand accounts to share and make people think. And what a powerful tool that would be alongside the real clinical science to support us. After all, skepticism, it shouldn't be about sort of being a professional pedant. It's not about telling people they're wrong or relishing having information that other people don't have. It's about relating human to human and having conversations about real things that happen to real people. And it's about giving color to that paint-by-number painting. So before I go, I want to tell you a story about something that happened to me when I arrived at QED a couple days ago. So my first flight that Brian mentioned, from Los Angeles to Philadelphia, it was delayed by 3 hours. And then a storm was over Philadelphia as we were about to go in. And so it prevented us from landing, and we were just circling and circling and circling. And finally we had to stop and make an emergency landing in Baltimore for fuel. And then when we got there, they said, oh, the flight crew has been on 24 hours, we need to switch flight crews, and long story short, I missed my second flight, and we ended up in Philadelphia for 24 hours. So by the time I arrived, I was like so beat, and I didn't want to talk to anybody, and I slept for 8 hours in the middle of the day. While I was sleeping, someone came and knocked on my door, and I opened it up, and there was this sort of short man. I don't know if he's here, but you're short. There was this kind of small man, and he was wielding one of those like old-timey razors that's like one knife, you know? And he was like waving about, and I was like, what? And so he like came. Just the way to ruin a good story. So So he came in and he was like wielding this thing in my face and he like pushed me against the wall and was doing this. And I was like, what the hell, man, what the hell? And he said, Occam's razor. Did you hear the punchline? Yeah. So that story didn't happen. But you will never forget it because there is nothing like a good story. Thanks.